It was a humid afternoon in Atlanta when Grace Wilson first saw the little boy sitting alone on the cracked steps of the children's home. She was there volunteering, wearing her worn-out nurse's scrubs and that tired smile she always wore after double shifts. The boy had wide blue eyes, blonde hair messy from neglect, and a silence that cut through the noise of other kids playing. When she offered him a juice box, he didn't even look up. "You can keep it," he mumbled, his voice rough from days of not talking. Grace sat beside him anyway, her heart aching because she saw herself in him, unwanted, unseen, and left behind. Years earlier, she had been abandoned too, not by parents, but by a system that never saw her worth. From that day, she decided she would love him like no one ever loved her. His name was Ethan. Grace worked 3 jobs to make adoption happen. People questioned her, a single black woman adopting a white boy in the South. But she never cared about the stares or whispers. What mattered was the smile Ethan gave her the first night in his new bed, whispering, "You smell like home." That single sentence made every struggle worth it. She gave him everything: private school, new clothes, summer camps. She took extra shifts at the hospital to afford his piano lessons and the shiny bike he begged for. Grace didn't have much, but Ethan never noticed. Her love filled every empty corner of his life. As the years passed, Ethan grew handsome and confident, but also distant. The kids at school made comments about his black mom, and Grace could see how it affected him. At first, he defended her proudly. But in high school, things changed. He stopped inviting friends over. He'd roll his eyes at her hugs and tell her not to drop him off at school anymore. Grace didn't blame him. She thought it was just teenage rebellion. But deep down, a quiet fear began to form. By the time Ethan turned 18, Grace had sacrificed nearly everything for him. She sold her old family house to pay for his college tuition. When she handed him the acceptance letter to Stanford, she cried tears of joy while he barely smiled. "I didn't have to do that, Mom," he said. But his tone wasn't gratitude. It was guilt mixed with entitlement. She brushed it off and hugged him tight. "I'd do anything for you, baby," she whispered. And she meant it. But college changed Ethan even more. He met people who didn't understand where he came from. When Grace visited him one weekend, she could feel the tension. His friends looked surprised to see her. The black woman in an old nurse uniform calling herself his mother. "You didn't tell us your mom was—" One of them started, and Grace smiled before he could finish. "Different? Yes, that's what makes me special." But Ethan didn't smile back. Months later, he called less and less. The boy who once held her hand during storms now ignored her messages. Grace prayed for him every night, believing love would bring him back. She had no idea that betrayal was already taking shape behind her back. Years later, when Grace lost her job due to health issues, she thought she could rely on Ethan. She had given him everything: her love, her youth, her home. But the day she showed up at the house she had helped him buy, carrying her suitcase after being evicted from her small apartment, he looked at her like a stranger. "Mom, you can't stay here." "It's not convenient," he said coldly. She thought he was joking. "Baby, I just need a few weeks till I find something, please." But Ethan's new girlfriend, Olivia, appeared behind him, whispering in his ear. And that's when Grace knew her boy was gone. He gave her a few $100s and told her to stay in a motel. That night, Grace sat on the edge of a cheap bed, her hands trembling as she looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. For the first time, she let the tears fall. Not because she was homeless, but because the boy she had loved like her own had forgotten who she was. But what neither of them knew was that life was about to take a turn. The same Grace Wilson who was kicked out that night would soon receive a letter that would change everything. A letter tied to a name she hadn't heard in decades. A name connected to a $300 million fortune. Before we move to the next part, tell me, what would you do if the child you raised turned their back on you after everything you sacrificed? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the next emotional twist in Grace's story. The morning sun barely touched the dusty window of the small motel room where Grace sat with her Bible open, but unread. She had spent the night crying silently, her chest tight from heartbreak, her soul heavy from betrayal. The boy she had raised, fed, and loved with everything she had was now a stranger who closed his door on her. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, But her hunger wasn't for food, it was for peace. She kept whispering the same line under her breath, "Lord, just show me a way." And that was when the knock came. A young man in a postal uniform stood there, holding a thick envelope with gold trim. "Are you Miss Grace Wilson?" he asked politely. She nodded, confused. "You need to sign for this," he said, handing her a pen. Grace rarely received mail anymore, certainly not the kind that required a signature. When she looked at the sender's name, her hands trembled. The law offices of Beckman and Hurst, New York City. She tore it open carefully, afraid of what it might say. Inside was a neatly folded letter and a sealed document with an embossed logo. The letter began, "Dear Miss Grace Wilson, we regret to inform you that your biological mother, Mrs. Helena Beckman, has passed away." Grace froze. Biological mother? For 60 years she believed she had been abandoned by a woman who never wanted her. She didn't even know her mother's name until now. The letter continued, "As the sole surviving heir to the Beckman estate, you are entitled to the inheritance and assets valued at approximately $300 million. Grace's hand covered her mouth. The room spun. She dropped the letter, fell to her knees, and whispered, "This can't be real." For most of her life she had worked 2 jobs to survive, patched her uniforms by hand, and bought food with coupons. Now, out of nowhere, someone was telling her she was the heir to one of the largest private fortunes in New York. She couldn't breathe. She thought maybe it was a cruel scam, but when she called the number on the letter, a calm voice answered, confirming every word. "Yes, Miss Wilson. The estate has been under legal hold awaiting your confirmation. We've been searching for you for over a decade." Grace sat in stunned silence. The lawyer on the line explained that her mother had been a powerful socialite from an old money family who had a child, out of wedlock with a man her family disapproved of, a man who was black. When the family found out, they forced Helena to give the baby away in secret. That baby was Grace, but Helena never forgot her. She had spent years searching quietly, setting up a trust that would activate only when Grace was found or when Helena passed away. Grace couldn't hold back the tears. The woman she thought had abandoned her had actually loved her all along. The words blurred on the page as she realized something deeper. All her life, she had chased love through others because she never knew she had been loved from the start. A week later, she was flown to New York. For the first time, Grace saw the life her mother had lived. A marble mansion, paintings worth millions, rooms filled with memories of a woman she never met. The lawyer handed her an old photo album and a handwritten note sealed in wax. Inside, in graceful cursive, the letter read, "My dearest Grace, I am sorry for the years we lost. I wanted to raise you, but the world I lived in was cruel. I hope this inheritance will give you the life you always deserved. I love you always." "Mom!" Grace wept uncontrollably. Not for the money, not even for the pain, but for the realization that love had been waiting for her all along, hidden behind locked doors she never knew existed. She looked at the grand portrait of Helena hanging on the wall and whispered, "I forgive you, Mama." In the days that followed, the lawyers transferred the assets to Grace's name. Stocks, properties, accounts, everything. Suddenly she was one of the wealthiest women in the country. But despite all the luxury around her, Grace felt only one thing, and peace. For the first time, she didn't have to work for love or prove her worth. She could finally breathe. But then came the call that made her pause. Ethan. After ignoring her for months, her adopted son suddenly wanted to talk. His voice was shaky, almost desperate. "Mom, can we meet? I think I made a mistake." Grace closed her eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't know. He had no idea she now owned an empire. She could have told him right then, could have humiliated him the way he humiliated her, but that wasn't who she was. She agreed to meet him, not for revenge, but for closure. The next morning, Grace arrived at the same cafe where she used to take Ethan when he was a boy. She wore a simple dress and no jewelry, just the same warm smile she always had. Ethan showed up late, wearing designer clothes and an expensive watch. He looked nervous. "Mom, I've been thinking about you," he began. Grace nodded quietly. "Olivia left me," he confessed. "And I realized I treated you horribly. I shouldn't have kicked you out. I was just embarrassed." Grace listened, her heart heavy but calm. "Why embarrassed, baby?" she asked softly. Ethan looked down, ashamed. Because people didn't understand. They laughed. They said I wasn't really your son. Grace took his hand and said, "But you were. I chose you, Ethan. I loved you when no one else would. But you forgot that love isn't something you earn. It's something you honor." Before we move to the next part, if you were in Grace's place, would you forgive him or walk away? Tell me what your heart says in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for section 3, where Grace decides how to use her newfound fortune and how to teach her son the lesson of a lifetime. Grace looked into Ethan's blue eyes, the same eyes she had once wiped tears from when he was just a scared little boy, and she saw nothing but confusion and guilt. The cafe was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of music and the clinking of cups. She could see how lost he was. No longer the confident man who threw her out, but a broken son trying to patch up his mistakes. "Mom, I really need your help," he said finally, his voice cracking. Grace didn't react right away. She wanted to ask him what kind of help, but deep down, she already knew. He began explaining that he had lost his job, that the luxury condo she had helped him get was in foreclosure, and that Olivia, the woman he had chosen over his mother, had taken his savings and left. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice trembling. Grace listened silently, stirring her tea. The same boy who once said she was an embarrassment now sat before her begging for help. But Grace wasn't bitter. Her soul had been softened by pain, not hardened. She smiled faintly and said, "Ethan, sometimes life has to take everything from you before you understand what really matters." He looked at her, puzzled. "So you're not mad?" he asked. Grace's eyes glistened. "I was hurt," she admitted, "but being mad only keeps you chained to the past. I've learned that forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for yourself." Ethan nodded slowly, shame washing over his face. Grace didn't mention her inheritance, not yet. She wanted him to face life as a man, not hide behind money. That evening she returned to her hotel, a 5-star suite now, though she still lived modestly, choosing not to flaunt her new wealth. She sat by the window overlooking the city, thinking about Ethan. She still loved him, but love had to come with boundaries now. Grace had spent her life giving without limits, and all it got her was emptiness. She decided that if Ethan was truly sorry, he'd prove it, not with words, but with actions. Over the next few weeks, Grace began quietly rebuilding her life. She visited her new properties, including a nursing foundation her late mother had funded decades ago. Seeing the building, filled with patients and nurses, sparked something inside her. She thought about all the people like her, caretakers who gave everything but were forgotten. She decided to expand that foundation and rename it the Helena and Grace Foundation for Caregivers. It would provide housing, financial aid, and emotional support for nurses and single mothers. Grace wanted her legacy to mean something. Meanwhile, Ethan called her more often, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to ask for small favors. Grace listened but never offered money. One afternoon he called again, this time crying. "Mom, I'm getting evicted. They're changing the locks tomorrow," he said. Grace's heart ached, but she stayed calm. "Do you have a plan?" she asked softly. "No," he sobbed. "I don't have anyone else." Grace sighed deeply. "Maybe it's time you start over. Come by tomorrow. We'll talk." The next day, Ethan arrived wearing the same clothes as before, wrinkled and tired. When he entered the elegant apartment, he stopped in shock. "Mom, what is this place?" Grace smiled gently. "Just a little something I've been staying in." He looked around at the expensive furniture, the marble floors, the art on the walls. "How can you afford this?" he asked, clearly confused. Grace motioned for him to sit. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly. She handed him the letter from the lawyers. He read it once, then twice, then looked up, eyes wide. $300 million. "Mom, you're rich?" he stammered. Grace nodded calmly. "I didn't even know until a few weeks ago. My birth mother left it to me." Ethan's mouth fell open. "But why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Grace smiled faintly. "Because I needed to see if your heart had changed before money did." He sat there, speechless. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, full of all the things he wanted to say but couldn't. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I don't deserve you." Grace reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "No one deserves unconditional love, Ethan. We grow into it by how we treat others. But you have a chance to be better. The question is, will you? That night, Grace offered him a guest room, not as a favor, but as a chance to start over. She gave him small tasks around her foundation, starting with helping organize events for nurses and volunteers. At first, Ethan resisted. He wasn't used to humility, but slowly he began to change. Seeing the people his mother was helping, single parents, overworked nurses, elderly women who reminded him of Grace, opened his eyes. He began to realize how deeply selfish he had been. Days turned into weeks, and for the first time Ethan began calling Grace Mom again, not out of habit, but out of love. They shared dinners, laughed over old memories, and rebuilt something that had been broken for years. Grace still guarded her heart, but she also saw that maybe this was the lesson both of them needed, to understand the difference between love and dependence. But peace never lasts long. One evening, a call from the lawyer shook everything again. "Ms. Wilson," the voice said, "we've uncovered something you need to see. It's about your mother's past, and it could change the entire inheritance." Grace froze, the spoon falling from her hand. What secret could still be hiding after all this time? Before we move to the next part, what do you think the lawyer discovered about Grace's inheritance? Was it truly hers, or is there a hidden twist waiting to unfold? Tell me your theory in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for Section 4, where a shocking revelation threatens to destroy everything Grace just rebuilt. Next morning, Grace woke up uneasy. The lawyer's late-night call echoed in her mind like a warning she couldn't ignore. She had finally started to breathe again after years of heartbreak, and now the past was knocking on her door once more. As she dressed and prepared to leave for the law office, she glanced at Ethan asleep on the couch. The same son who had once thrown her out, now finding shelter under her roof again. She smiled faintly, whispered a prayer, and left quietly. When she arrived, the tall glass doors of Beckman and Hurst gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the woman she had become, elegant yet humble, wealthy yet grounded. The receptionist led her to a conference room where Mr. Hurst, her late mother's lawyer, waited with a serious expression. He greeted her politely, but there was tension in his voice. "Ms. Wilson, thank you for coming so quickly. I wouldn't have called unless it was important." Grace sat down, her hands clasped. "What's going on?" she asked softly. Mr. Hurst opened a thick folder and pushed a document across the table. "During a final audit of the Beckman estate, we uncovered sealed correspondence between your mother and the family's board of trustees. There's something you should see." Grace hesitated, then opened the letter. It was dated 30 years ago, written by her mother, Helena. The handwriting was elegant, but the words were heavy. "If anything happens to me before my daughter is found, please ensure that her biological father's family is also contacted. He may have rights to the estate. His name is Charles Wilson." Grace blinked in confusion. "Charles Wilson?" she whispered. "That was my father's name." The lawyer nodded slowly. "Yes. We did some digging, and it appears Mr. Wilson came from a military family with substantial assets of their own. It seems your mother merged certain holdings with his before her death. However, there's a potential claim being made by someone who says they're his descendant, which could affect your inheritance." Grace's heart dropped. "Someone's claiming my father's estate?" Mr. Hurst nodded. "A man named Daniel Wilson. He presented DNA evidence that confirms a connection to your father's side. If this claim is verified, he may have rights to a portion of the inheritance. But the court hasn't made a decision yet." Grace leaned back in her chair, trying to process it all. For years she thought she had no family, and now suddenly she might have relatives, and possibly a fight for the fortune. "What does this Daniel want?" she asked carefully. Mr. Hurst sighed. "He's requesting a meeting. He said he doesn't want to take what's yours, but wants to make things right between the families." Grace agreed to meet him. 2 days later, she sat in a quiet hotel lounge waiting. When Daniel walked in, she was taken aback. He looked to be in his early 50s, tall with the same deep eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. He extended a hand and smiled. "You must be Grace," he said warmly. "You look just like our father." She studied him, unsure if she could trust him, but there was something genuine about his tone, something familiar. "So you're my half-brother," she said quietly. He nodded. "I didn't even know about you until recently. Our father never talked about his past. But when I found out, I wanted to meet you, not because of the money, but because you're family." They spent hours talking. Daniel told her stories about their father, how he had tried to search for the child he never got to raise, how he'd carried guilt his whole life. Grace listened, tears filling her eyes. For the first time, she heard about the man who had given her his name, but not his presence. It filled a void she didn't even know still existed. After that meeting, Grace told her lawyers to settle things fairly. She offered Daniel a percentage of the assets connected to their father's side, even though she wasn't required to. When the lawyers expressed surprise, she simply said, "Money shouldn't divide what love never got the chance to build." Meanwhile, Ethan grew more curious. He had overheard some conversations and knew something big was happening. One evening, he confronted her. "Mom, is it true someone's trying to take your inheritance?" Grace smiled calmly. "It's not about taking, baby. It's about sharing what was never given." Ethan frowned. "But that's not fair." "You earned it." Grace shook her head softly. "You can't earn what's meant for you. And you can't lose what's given by grace." That night, Ethan stayed quiet for a long time. Something in her words struck him deeply. He began helping more at her foundation, spending time with the people she cared for, and learning humility in ways he never imagined. He was slowly becoming the man she had always hoped he'd be. A few weeks later, the court officially recognized Grace and Daniel as co-heirs, splitting part of the inheritance tied to their father's estate. But Helena's main fortune, the $300 million legacy, remained solely Grace's. After the hearing, Daniel hugged her and said, "Our mother and father would be proud. You've carried their hearts better than anyone." Grace smiled through her tears. "Maybe I just learned how to love without needing to own." When she returned home that evening, Ethan was waiting with dinner ready, something he'd never done before. They sat together quietly, and for the first time there was peace between them. Grace knew life wasn't done teaching her lessons, but she had learned the most important one, that love, forgiveness, and family mean more than any fortune ever could. But just when everything seemed to settle, a news headline broke across every channel the next morning: "Mystery heiress Grace Wilson to donate half her fortune to charity." The world began buzzing, and Ethan's phone lit up with calls from old friends, some pretending to care, some trying to get close again. The question was, what would Ethan do now that the world finally knew who his mother really was? Before we move to the next part, if you were Ethan, would you stand proudly beside your mother or fall back into greed and temptation again? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for Section 5, where the world discovers Grace's generosity and Ethan faces a test that could change his life forever. By the next morning, Grace Wilson's quiet life vanished like mist. Her phone buzzed non-stop with reporters, old acquaintances, and people she hadn't heard from in years. Every news channel carried her story. Former nurse inherits $300 million, plans massive charity donation. The internet exploded with photos of her smiling outside the courthouse, stories about her adoption, and clips from interviews she never gave. Grace wasn't looking for attention, but it found her anyway. And through all the noise, she remained calm, sipping tea on her balcony while the world tried to make sense of her story. Ethan watched it unfold on TV, his emotions tangled. On one hand, he was proud. His mother, the woman he had once called embarrassing, was now being celebrated as a hero. But on the other hand, guilt gnawed at him. Every headline that called her selfless reminded him of how selfish he'd been. He remembered the night he'd told her she wasn't his real mom. That memory burned now like fire. When he walked into the living room, Grace looked up and smiled. "Quite the fuss, isn't it?" she said softly. Ethan nodded awkwardly. "Mom, the whole world's talking about you." She chuckled gently. "They're not talking about me, baby. They're talking about what kindness can do when it's finally seen." Ethan sat beside her. "I saw the headlines about you giving half of it away. Is that true?" Grace nodded. "It's already in motion. The Helena and Grace Foundation will help nurses, caregivers, and single mothers around the country. I want others to have the support I never had." Ethan frowned, confused. "But Mom, that's hundreds of millions. Why not keep it? You deserve to enjoy it." Grace smiled, placing her hand on his. "I've had enough of what money can't buy, Ethan. Now it's time to give what it can." Those words lingered with him all day. As Grace became a national symbol of humility, Ethan began noticing how people around them changed. Neighbors who once ignored her now smiled and waved. Journalists begged for interviews. Even Olivia, his ex-girlfriend, suddenly started calling again, pretending she wanted to apologize. Ethan ignored her at first, but curiosity won. One evening he agreed to meet her, a mistake he'd soon regret. They met at a downtown cafe. Olivia looked glamorous as always, her perfume heavy, her smile fake. "Ethan, I heard about your mom," she began. "That's incredible." He crossed his arms. "What do you want, Olivia?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I was wrong before. I didn't realize who your mom really was. You two could do so much with that kind of influence. We could do so much together." Ethan felt his stomach twist. For a second he saw the old life he'd lost. Luxury, power, attention. Then he remembered his mother's words. "I'm not interested," he said firmly. "You used me when I had nothing, and you're trying to use me now that I have something again. That's not love." Olivia's smile faded. "So you're just going to waste it all? Be your mom's shadow?" she snapped. He stood up quietly and said, "If being her shadow means standing in her light, then I'll gladly stay there." He left her speechless and didn't look back. When he got home, Grace was sitting at the table going through letters from people across the country. Some shared stories of gratitude. Others begged for help. "So many people hurting," she whispered. "Now you can't save everyone," Ethan said gently. "I know," she smiled, "but I can try." Days turned into weeks, and Grace's foundation launched its first major project, free housing and health care for caregivers. News cameras followed her every move, but she stayed humble, always redirecting praise to others. Ethan became her right hand, managing operations, visiting hospitals, and listening to people's stories. For the first time in his life, he felt useful, not because of money, but because of purpose. Then one day a reporter cornered him after an event. "Ethan, is it true you're not her biological son?" the reporter asked. Ethan froze for a moment. Cameras flashed. He could have walked away, but instead he smiled. "That's right," he said calmly. "She adopted me when no one else would. She may not be my biological mother, but she's the only mom I've ever had, and I thank God she chose me." That clip went viral overnight. Millions of people around the world praised his words. Grace saw the video and cried silently. She had waited years to hear those words, not from the world but from the boy she loved. That night she hugged him tightly. "Have you finally found your heart again?" she whispered. Ethan smiled through tears. "No, Mom, you gave it back to me." Their bond grew stronger, but with fame came pressure. Invitations poured in, galas, TV shows, charity boards. Grace politely declined most of them. She didn't want fame. She wanted peace. But one invitation caught her attention, a national award ceremony honoring women who changed America. Her name was at the top of the list. At first she wanted to skip it, but Ethan insisted. "You deserve this," he said. On the night of the ceremony, she walked the red carpet wearing a simple blue dress. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes filled the air, but she stayed graceful. When her name was called, the audience stood, applauding the woman who turned pain into purpose. Grace walked to the stage slowly, holding her speech in trembling hands. She took a deep breath and said, "I once believed love meant giving until you had nothing left. But now I know love means giving wisely, without losing yourself. I was abandoned as a child, forgotten as a mother, and found again by grace, the very name I was given. If my story teaches anything, let it be that kindness never dies, even when it's thrown away." The audience erupted in applause. Ethan stood in the front row, clapping with tears streaming down his face. For the first time he saw his mother not as the woman he took for granted, but as the miracle she truly was. But as they returned home that night, Grace began coughing uncontrollably. The joy of the evening faded as she struggled to catch her breath. Ethan rushed to her side, panic in his eyes. "Mom, what's wrong?" She tried to smile but couldn't. "Just a little tired," she whispered. But deep down she knew. Her body had been carrying more than her heart ever showed. Before we move to the next part, what do you think is happening to Grace? Is it exhaustion or something much deeper? Tell me what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for Section 6, the heartbreaking yet inspiring conclusion of Grace's story. Weeks passed after the world learned who Martha truly was and what she had endured. The internet was flooded with stories calling her the forgotten mother of gold and the woman who forgave the unforgivable. Reporters camped outside her mansion gates hoping to get a glimpse of the woman who went from cleaning houses to owning a $300 million empire. But Martha stayed silent. She spent her days quietly walking through her rose garden, talking to the gardeners, and helping nearby families who were struggling to pay rent. Her life had changed in wealth, but her heart had not. One afternoon, while she was sitting by her lake reading a worn Bible, a familiar voice called her name. It was David. He stood a few feet away, thinner than before, eyes red from tears. He hesitated before whispering, "Mom, please, I don't deserve to call you that, but I had to see you." She looked up at him calmly, not with anger but with deep sorrow. He dropped to his knees and broke down. "I lost everything, Mom, the house, the job, the friends. They only cared about me when I had money. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I can't live with myself knowing how I treated you." Martha took a long pause, then slowly stood and walked toward him. "David," she said softly, "money can be replaced, but love, once it's broken, it takes time to heal." He sobbed, "Can you ever forgive me?" She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Forgiveness is not a gift I give lightly, but I prayed for strength. And yes, I forgive you." He looked up, stunned. You forgive me?" She nodded, tears finally falling. "Because holding on to hate only chains the heart, and I'm finally free." David wept harder, unable to speak. She invited him inside and offered him a meal, the same way she had when he was a hungry child. But this time it wasn't pity. It was love reborn. In the following months, Martha set up a foundation in her late husband's name to support orphans, single mothers, and abandoned children, people like the boy she had once taken in. David began volunteering there every day. The two slowly rebuilt their bond, not as a rich mother and a greedy son, but as two broken souls learning to heal. One evening, as they stood on the balcony watching the sunset, David whispered, "You know, Mom, I used to think money was power, but you taught me it's love." Martha smiled faintly. "And now you finally understand, my son. True wealth is the heart that forgives." Months later, when Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep, David sat by her bed, holding her hand and whispering through his tears, "Thank you for teaching me what real love means." The will she left behind shocked the lawyers once again. David wasn't written out this time. Instead, she had split her fortune between him and the foundation, with a letter that simply read, "Forgiveness is the richest inheritance of all." Her story spread across the world, inspiring millions. People didn't just remember her for the $300 million she had inherited, but for the priceless grace she had shown. David became a quiet man afterward, dedicating his life to the charity she founded. Every year he visited her grave with fresh lilies, whispering, "I'll make you proud, Mum." And in that quiet corner of the earth, where forgiveness once bloomed out of pain, Martha's legacy continued, stronger, brighter, and richer than gold. And for everyone watching this right now, I have a question for you. If you were in Martha's place, could you forgive someone who betrayed you for money? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more emotional stories like this one, because sometimes the richest hearts come from the poorest beginnings.